fine silken cloth, beautiful wood mesh, a handsome walnut veneer. This is the Pioneer CS-77A speaker from 1971. I got it at an estate sale. Actually, I got two of them. And they're in great shape. Except, of course, they weren't when I bought them. This is the nature of thrifting. So I thought today I would show you what I did to get these working again, and then we'll take a quick look at the speakers themselves. Let's jump in. If you're new to the channel, my goal is to make vintage stereo equipment as accessible as possible to people with zero experience. To that end, I think it's important to reiterate that I have no real experience fixing stereo equipment beyond what I've done in the last 30-something videos, which is practically nothing. I'm a total novice at this, and as a novice, I found this repair to be very easy and very straightforward. So I'm going to show you step by step what I did to get these working again, and hopefully you'll be inspired to try fixing your own speakers. Because I don't have any proper test equipment, I made a little portable test wire that I can use to hook the speaker to my phone. It's under warranty. Now, I got sound out of them, but the high frequencies were missing. It sounded like somebody tossed an old blanket over the speaker. However, with my concert-damaged hearing, I couldn't tell if the tweeters were totally silent or just really quiet. Weirdly, one of the easiest ways for me to tell is a paper towel roll. If I hold it up to my ear and pass it over the small speakers, it'll muffle the surrounding sounds and I can tell if that speaker is playing anything. PSA, wear ear protection when you go to concerts. Fortunately, the horn-style tweeter at the top was working. It was just really quiet. However, there's a little test that you can still do if you don't have any tools whatsoever to see if a speaker works or not. I just snagged one of the batteries out of the TV remote and tear off a little piece of aluminum foil. If you tape the foil to one end of the battery, you can touch the terminals of the speaker and it should crackle like this. If it doesn't, there's a good chance the speaker is no good and you'll want to try to find another one online since fixing a speaker cone itself is not easy. Now, obviously with a multimeter, you can test continuity, you can check the resistance, and with other tools, you can test it in a myriad other ways. But we're for the moment assuming you only have a screwdriver or you unscrewed the speaker with a fork somehow and have no other tools of any kind. But if it passes the foil and battery test, chances are you don't have to buy one on eBay, and that's great because capacitors are a lot cheaper than speaker cones, usually. Now in the last video, I specifically went out of my way to repair the crossover in the laziest and cheapest way I possibly could, because I wanted to show what was possible on a shoestring budget with minimal tools, time, and experience. Today, I'm going to go the other route by taking the time to do it properly, in as much as an amateur can do, and walk you through every step so that maybe you can do it yourself. And you absolutely can do this yourself. If you ask me, it's worth it to try even if the speakers aren't good quality because the experience of fixing them is often worth as much or more than the speakers themselves. The first thing I did was remove the front grille. It's held on with little Velcro pads so you can just pull it off when you need to. We'll ignore the rotten foam on that tweeter for now because I'm going to fix that later. Next, I flipped it face down and removed the screws from the back. There are 14 total. I used a drill driver to save time. The back was still stuck down though because of 4 little staples which are difficult to remove without damaging the fiberboard, so I ended up flipping it on its side, pulling the 5-inch cone out, and very gently tapping on the back panel through the hole with the handle of a hammer. In retrospect, I probably should have gone in through the larger woofer hole so as not to risk hitting the crossover board. I reinstalled the driver before I flipped the whole thing back over because I didn't foresee having to remove it again. With the back panel now loose, I was able to lift it up and unclip the wires from the side of the cabinet. Each of the individual speakers have clips where the wires hook on. I just pulled each wire off and was able to remove the whole panel. However, the solder joints are on the back of the board, so I still had to remove it from the back panel by pulling off these 10 screws. I like to keep screws in old pill bottles so I don't lose them. The board is also glued down, so it required a little coaxing. They've hidden the solder joints behind this black acrylic panel, so to get it off, I had to remove the 2 selector knobs. That is a lot of dust. Then unscrew the 2 wire terminals. Make sure not to lose the little washers, then unscrew the nuts on the selector switches. Finally, I had access to the solder joints and could cast the ring into the fire. To make the job easier, I reinstalled the wire terminals because the screws they're attached to flop around otherwise, and I did not want to break those off. I also took a second to mark on the back with a Sharpie which joints went to which capacitor so I'd know what went where. The glue they used made it a lot harder to desolder things and had to be cut. It was kind of a pain, but once they were loose, I was able to melt the solder and pull them off in spite of the glue puddles. The next step was removing the old solder. They used a lot, and it took a couple of times with the solder sucker to get most of it off. It filled the tube every time I used it. They used a lot of solder. Finally, it was time for the new caps, which are a little bit bigger than the old ones. I put the small ones in first because it was hard to reach them once the 50 microfarad one was installed. I just bent the leads flat and applied solder. I made sure I applied enough to have a good connection and to match the other connections within reason. Then I just cut off the excess lead wires. Keep in mind, these are non-polarized capacitors, so they work in either direction. Once all the caps were in, I went in and glued them down so that they wouldn't vibrate. And that was it. All the caps were installed and ready to go. Before I reassembled everything, I took a second to clean the knobs off because they were covered in decades of desert dust. Then it was just a matter of putting everything back together. Pioneer conveniently labeled which wires go to which speaker. Remember, white wires are negative for these. That was it. They were done and ready to... That's right, the foam. I guess they weren't done. Oops. The 3-inch tweeter on these uses a different surround than the others. While the other drivers use a nice fabric material, the tweeters use a foam which rots and has to be replaced. Fortunately, that's not difficult either. Just unscrew it and disconnect the wires. With the speaker removed, I find it easiest to use a vacuum to remove the old foam. I don't want it to fall into the basket and end up stuck in there, or it'll sound like you have bees in your speakers. I just used a paint can opener to gently scrape off the old foam from the basket and from the paper bezel that goes on top. The foam surround that I ordered came with a tube of glue. I just applied a bead around the inside lip of the foam and attached it to the paper cone. I always let that dry first, then once it's dry, I go in and I glue the outer edge down to the basket so that the cone can center itself and not rub while it plays. In retrospect, I realized I was in a hurry and forgot to clean off the old foam and glue that was stuck to the basket. If you do this, make sure you remember to clean that stuff off. Isopropyl alcohol on a cotton swab seems to work pretty well for that. Once the outer glue was tacky, I pressed it down with an old dental pick. Then the paper bezel could be glued down, which gives it a nice finished look. Even the FB was still visible. I let the speaker sit for a few hours before reattaching the wires and reinstalling it back in the cabinet. And that was it. After the glue dried for a little while, I went in and I cleaned up a few excess drips with a pair of tweezers. While everything dried, it was a good time to go in with some furniture polish on the wood grill. It's very dry here. Full disclosure, this is the first time I've actually tried doing a recap the way it's supposed to be done. The last video was the first time I've done it at all, and I'm still pretty new to soldering. It was definitely a learning experience for me, but it was a lot of fun, and I got to listen to an audiobook the whole time, which was great. The Two Towers, if you're wondering. But now, here they are, restored and working correctly. So let's take a tour of these speakers, yeah? These are the CS-77A high-fidelity speaker system from Pioneer. They're nothing if not attractive with genuine walnut cabinets. The front grille is real wood, and behind it is a thin green pleated saran cloth. They've even added these little black clips on each of the vertices, or nodes, I'm not really sure what to call them, and the Pioneer emblem is pinned to the saran cloth. This is a 4-way speaker system, which means 4 speaker drivers. If you remove the grille, you're greeted by a 12-inch woofer, a 5-inch mid driver, a 3-inch tweeter, and a multicellular horn-type super tweeter. The 3 cone-type drivers are made from Pioneer's patented FB cone paper. That's a paper which combines natural wood fibers like banana tree with wool in what they call a free beaten process that smashes the fibers rather than chopping them, which they claim makes for a stronger, lighter material. The horn tweeter has 3 small cells because this type of tweeter tends to be more forward focused than regular cone style drivers. Think flashlight versus a floodlight. It has 3 little square cells that spread the sound out to make the speaker sound more consistent from a wider range of listening angles. If we spin them around, we can see that these were at one point moved on Beacon's van lines over some long distance. The black panel in the back has a pair of input terminals and 2 tone selector knobs. The blue and white wire terminals are spring-loaded, so all you have to do is press the button to reveal a little hole, insert the wire, and let go, and the speaker wire is held securely. The selector knobs allow you to either increase or decrease the high and mid frequencies depending on your particular taste. According to the manual, the highs are increased or decreased by 2 decibels and the mids by 1.5 decibels. When I switch between them, I definitely can hear the difference, and it is very, very noticeable. Now, these were recommended by Pioneer to be paired with their SX770, SX990 or SX1000TW receivers and their model T6600 reel-to-reel tape machine. I don't have those, and there were no receivers at the house where I bought these. Fortunately, I was able to hook them up in my living room to try them out. Now, as I've stated previously, to show you a demo of the sound is more or less useless since I lack the proper mics or equipment. However, after listening to them, I have to say that they feel really balanced, and I personally think they sound best with old jazz recordings. I tried a few styles of music out, and like a lot of vintage speakers that I've encountered, they don't really impress me as much with contemporary music, but seem to really shine when I play older stuff that was recorded around the same time as the speakers themselves were manufactured, which that's not really that surprising. Compared to the setup I have, they don't really pull the crisp highs that my Martin Logans do, but they're very clear and I do very much enjoy the sound of them. However, they're still not technically high-end speakers. They were meant to be affordable to soldiers deployed overseas. That's where these two specifically came from. They were bought and shipped stateside along with the CS-73As from the last video. Same guy. These, however, do sound markedly better than the other ones, which again is not surprising considering these are much better speakers and the capacitors weren't Amazon cheapos. So let's take a quick look at the cost. The capacitors were $66.28 after tax and shipping from Parts Express. The foam surrounds were $26.05 from Amazon. That's a total of $92.33 in parts. I'll put a list of the capacitors that these speakers require in the description, but here's the schematic. As far as the tools go, the critical ones that I needed were a screwdriver, a soldering iron, a solder sucker, a wire cutter, pliers, and a razor blade. Using a shop vac, a drill driver, and a dental pick made things a lot easier as well, but weren't critical. So that is the Pioneer CS-77A 4-way speaker from 1971. For the next video, the return of the king of this speaker trilogy, I have a pair of Utah speakers that work fine but have thrashed cabinets, so I'm going to focus on cleaning up the wood and making them look pretty again. I hope you'll come back the next time for that one because restoring wood is always really satisfying to watch. So I'll see you again, and until then, stay metal.